What if I told you that the most powerful minds don't need an audience, that the greatest transformations don't happen in front of cameras or crowds, but behind closed doors, in the silence, in the shadows where no one's watching? In a world addicted to oversharing, the person who protects their privacy holds a rare kind of power, because when you stop giving everyone access to your mind, your energy, your soul, you begin to own yourself completely. And that right there is the beginning of a truly powerful mind. Most people fear being alone, not because solitude is painful, but because it reflects the truth they've avoided. When the world is quiet and no one is watching, all the noise you carry inside finally speaks. And that's the beginning of growth. You see, solitude isn't a punishment, it's a sanctuary, a sacred space where the ego weakens and the soul starts to stretch. It's not silence that's uncomfortable, it's being confronted by the parts of ourselves we've neglected. But those parts, the ones we hide from the world and even from ourselves, are often the birthplace of something extraordinary. You don't build a powerful mind in the spotlight. You build it in the shadows, in the places no one claps for you, where there's no audience to perform for. It's in those long, unseen hours when you're sitting with your thoughts, facing the truth without distraction, that real clarity emerges. Solitude is the soil where great minds grow because, in isolation, you're forced to confront your own mind, its chaos, its brilliance, and its potential. You begin to see not just the world, but yourself, with terrifying honesty, and that honesty, although uncomfortable, is pure. It's what forms the foundation of self-awareness, and self-awareness is the root of wisdom. When you're constantly surrounded by noise, by the voices, opinions, likes, and validation of others, your inner voice becomes a whisper. You lose track of what you actually think, what you actually believe, and who you really are. But in solitude, that whisper grows louder. It begins to speak with authority. That's when the shift happens, when the opinions of others lose their power and your mind begins to stand on its own. Solitude also gives you time. Time to think slowly, to think deeply, not in the frantic pace the world demands, but in the rhythm your soul craves. A mind that has time to reflect becomes sharp, it becomes wise, it becomes dangerous, in the most beautiful way, because it no longer reacts, it understands. Most people are in a rush to speak, to be heard, to be seen, but the greatest thinkers throughout history, the ones who shaped entire paradigms, were not in a rush. They withdrew, they disappeared. They sat in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because they were listening. Listening to the silence within, listening to the deeper intelligence that doesn't scream, but whispers. That whisper only gets louder when you stop drowning it in distractions. In a culture obsessed with sharing everything, with being constantly visible, solitude becomes rebellion. It becomes strength, and in that rebellion, something amazing begins to grow. Discernment. You start to choose your words more carefully. Your time becomes sacred. Your thoughts become sharp like a blade. You no longer give your energy to everything that moves. You hold it, you cultivate it, and you release it only when it matters. You begin to recognize that not every conversation deserves your voice. Not every moment needs to be shared. The more you protect your solitude, the more your thoughts begin to crystallize into clarity. And when that clarity is finally shared with the world, it carries a depth that can't be faked. People feel it because it wasn't rushed, it wasn't posted for validation. It was born in silence and shaped in solitude. That's where truth lives. We live in a world where people wear noise like armor. They're terrified of stillness because stillness demands presence. But presence is where power lives, and you can't be fully present when your mind is constantly chasing the next moment, the next notification, the next approval. In solitude, the chase ends. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, just you, your thoughts, and the truth. That's where the powerful mind begins to take shape, not in the noise, but in the quiet, not in the applause, but in the absence of it. If you want to grow, really grow, don't fear solitude. Embrace it, not just as a moment, but as a practice, a discipline, a sacred ritual you return to again and again, because solitude isn't loneliness. Solitude is the training ground for minds that are meant to lead. It's where you meet yourself, not as the world sees you, but as you really are. And once you've met that version of yourself, everything changes. The most powerful transformation doesn't happen in public. It happens in private, in silence, in solitude. Your mind is your most sacred territory, and not everyone deserves access to it. But in a world where people trade their thoughts for likes and their silence for attention, guarding your inner world becomes a radical act of strength. The more you expose your inner life to the noise of the outside world, the more power you hand over to things that don't serve you. That's the truth most people don't want to face. When you don't protect your mind, someone else will try to own it. Mental power doesn't just come from intelligence or education. It comes from containment, from knowing what to share and what to keep sacred. Every time you speak out of impulse, every time you post something deeply personal for instant approval, you lose a bit of that power. It's like pouring water into a sieve it escapes. But when you hold your thoughts with intention, when you give your energy only where it's earned, your mind becomes focused, grounded, unstoppable. Not everything needs to be explained. Not every feeling needs an audience. There is strength in mystery, and there is mastery in restraint. A powerful mind understands this. It doesn't seek to be known, it seeks to know, because knowing yourself deeply and without performance is a lifelong process. And that process becomes impossible when you're constantly externalizing your thoughts for validation. You can't think clearly when your thoughts are always being filtered through how they'll be received by others. The strongest minds are the ones that live beneath the surface. They speak when it matters. They listen more than they speak. They don't throw their energy into every conversation, every debate, every distraction. They hold their center, and from that center they create, they lead, they grow. But to build that kind of center, you have to become selective, not just about what you consume, but about what you give away. What happens when you guard your inner world? You begin to hear it more clearly. Your intuition sharpens. You start noticing patterns you used to miss, within yourself, within others, within life. You no longer react out of habit. You respond with awareness. You start to see where your energy leaks, and you seal those leaks with discipline, discipline of thought, discipline of emotion, discipline of attention. We are surrounded by a culture that rewards noise and exposure. But noise is not knowledge, exposure is not power. What you keep to yourself often holds more value than what you share with the world, because what's private is often what's still forming, still evolving. It needs protection to grow. Just like you wouldn't dig up a seed every day to see if it's sprouting, you don't need to expose every thought, every plan, every struggle. Let it grow in darkness. Let it gather strength in silence. Let it become something before you present it. There's a confidence that comes when you no longer feel the need to explain yourself, when your decisions, your path, your thoughts are guided by your own compass. That confidence doesn't come from ego, it comes from peace, a peace that is earned by building a relationship with your own mind, and that relationship thrives only when it's protected from unnecessary interference. You don't owe your mind to the world. You don't owe your thoughts to the algorithm. You owe it to yourself to become someone who knows how to listen to their own voice before they ask the world for answers. That's the kind of mental power that changes lives, quietly, steadily, profoundly. Every great thinker, every strong leader, every mind that left a mark on the world had one thing in common. They were careful with their inner life. They didn't throw their thoughts into the wind hoping someone would catch them. They refined those thoughts. They lived with them. They allowed them to ferment in solitude, to evolve in silence, until the time came to speak or act with precision. That's the power of containment, of guarding what matters, not with fear, but with wisdom, because the more you protect your mind, the more your mind will protect you. It will become your anchor when the world is chaotic, your compass when the path is unclear, and your weapon when you're called to rise. If you want a powerful mind, don't waste your energy proving it. Build it quietly, guard it fiercely, and let the results speak for themselves. We live in a world that rewards openness, that celebrates vulnerability, but only to a point. And here's what most people miss. The more of yourself you reveal, especially prematurely or carelessly, the more power you hand over. Every thought, every plan, every emotion you expose becomes something that can be judged, manipulated, or misunderstood. And when you allow too many eyes into your mind, your choices begin to shift, not based on truth, but based on how those eyes will react. Control over your life begins with control over your energy, and energy follows attention. The moment you share a personal decision, a goal, a vision for your life, you've already opened the door to noisy opinions, doubts, expectations, even envy. That noise, if you're not careful, can start steering the ship. You start second guessing, you hesitate, you dilute the original intent. What was once yours is now being reshaped by forces outside you. And suddenly you've lost control, not because you weren't strong, but because you handed out the blueprint of your mind too early, too freely. Privacy is power. It doesn't mean secrecy out of fear. It means self-respect. It means recognizing that not everything is meant to be consumed, commented on, or shared. When you hold something sacred, your goals, your inner work, your relationships, it becomes harder for the world to distort it. You stay in control, not just of the narrative, but of your energy, your direction, your peace. Most people don't realize how many micro decisions they make based on what others know or might think. They speak differently when they know they're being watched. They act out of character when they feel like they need to live up to something they once shared. That's how subtle the loss of control can be. It's not always loud. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like small compromises, quiet self-betrayals. And before you know it, you're living a life curated for an audience rather than one aligned with your soul. True power is quiet. The strongest people you'll meet aren't the ones constantly explaining themselves. They're not broadcasting every move, every feeling, every plan. They move with intention. They speak when it matters. They allow their results to do the talking. And it's not because they're hiding. It's because they understand that the most valuable things lose their purity the moment they're exposed to the wrong eyes. You don't need to tell the world what you're doing while you're doing it. You don't need to explain your healing while you're still bleeding. You don't need to narrate your transformation before it's fully taken root. There is wisdom in the wait. Let your life evolve in the dark. Let your thoughts mature before you release them. There's a time to speak, yes, but there's also a time to be still and protect the process. Think of your mind like a fire. When it's just starting, it needs shelter. Too much wind, too much attention, and it goes out. But when it's strong, when the flame has taken hold, it can withstand anything. That's how your thoughts work. That's how your plans grow. If you expose them too soon, they lose momentum. But if you protect them, feed them, refine them, then, when you do finally reveal them, they're undeniable. The pressure to share everything, to be constantly visible, is a trap. It drains your focus. It opens you up to criticism that you're not yet equipped to handle. And worst of all, it creates an illusion of progress. Just because you've spoken, it doesn't mean you've lived it. Just because others know doesn't mean you've grown. Sometimes the most powerful step is not in telling, but in doing, quietly, relentlessly, without needing a witness. And so, if you truly want control over your life, your mind, your direction, start by choosing silence where others speak. Choose discretion where others overshare. Choose stillness where others scramble for validation. Because in that silence, that discretion, that stillness, you'll find the roots of true power. The more you reveal, the more you give away, the more you protect, the more you build. Power, real power, doesn't shout. It doesn't explain. It doesn't beg to be seen. It just is. And when you no longer need the world to see your process becomes unstoppable. We don't just think more clearly in silence. We feel more clearly too. There's a deep and often overlooked connection between privacy and emotional clarity. The more private space you give your emotions to breathe, the more honest they become. In contrast, when you're constantly talking about your feelings, explaining them, or performing them for others to understand, they begin to shift. They adapt to fit the narrative you're creating, and that narrative is rarely the full truth. We live in a time where self-expression is encouraged, even demanded. Share your story, they say. Be vulnerable, they insist. But there's a difference between genuine vulnerability and emotional exhibition. One comes from depth, the other often comes from confusion. When you're still in the process of feeling something, grief, anger, fear, even joy, it hasn't taken full form yet. It's raw, it's fluid, and it needs stillness, not spotlight, to become clear. Privacy is the space where your emotions reveal their real shape. When no one is watching, when no one is reacting, you can finally sit with the truth of what you feel without performance. You can ask yourself, is this sadness or disappointment? Is this anger or fear? Is this longing or loneliness? These questions don't have immediate answers. They don't show up the moment you post about what you're going through. They arrive in the quiet, when you've stopped needing to explain yourself. You gain emotional clarity when you don't have to filter your feelings through someone else's reactions. You begin to understand the root of your emotions, what triggered them, what patterns they reflect, what they're pointing to inside you. But that only happens when you give yourself time and space without interference. When your energy isn't scattered across group chats, timelines, or conversations you're not ready to have, you start to hear yourself clearly. And hearing yourself clearly is one of the most powerful things a person can do, because clarity leads to intentionality. You stop reacting from confusion. You begin responding from understanding. Your emotions stop being wild storms and start becoming messages. Signals, guides, that's what they were always meant to be. But when they're constantly projected outward, they lose their message and become noise. Many people are emotionally overwhelmed not because their emotions are too much, but because they've never had the space to truly meet them. To sit with them without commentary, without judgment, without needing someone else to say, I understand. That desire to be understood is natural, it's human, but when it becomes a habit, one where you can't feel without being seen, you begin to lose your own understanding of self. Real emotional maturity is built in solitude, when you can cry without needing an audience, when you can celebrate without needing applause, when you can hurt without immediately reaching for distraction or disclosure. That's when you begin to master your inner world, and with that mastery comes peace, not because the emotions disappear, but because you've created enough space to feel them fully, deeply, honestly. Privacy is not isolation. It's protection. It's creating a sacred container where your inner world can be heard without being distorted. When something painful happens, your first instinct shouldn't always be to share. It should be to listen. What is this feeling trying to show me? What part of me is still healing? What boundary was crossed? What truth was denied? These questions bring answers only when there's enough stillness for the answers to rise. The more you live publicly, the harder it becomes to tell where your emotions end and others' expectations begin. But when you reclaim your emotional privacy, you start seeing what's really yours, and that clarity, it changes everything. It helps you make decisions from a grounded place. It helps you connect more honestly with others. It allows you to feel without drowning in feeling. And here's the paradox. When you become emotionally clear in private, your presence becomes powerful in public. You no longer need to over-explain. You no longer seek validation. Your peace becomes evident, and people feel it, not because you shouted it, but because you lived it. So the next time you feel something deeply, don't rush to share. Don't rush to label it. Just sit with it. Let it pass through you. Let it speak. Let it become clear. And in that clarity, you will find strength that no outside voice can give you. Because privacy doesn't just protect your emotions, it purifies them. The world around you is noisy, relentlessly, aggressively noisy. There's always something demanding your attention. News cycles, social media, other people's opinions, chaos in the streets, chaos in the mind. Most people live in a constant state of mental motion, bouncing from one distraction to another, trying to find peace outside themselves while the real battlefield is within. But here's the truth. Nothing out there gets quieter until something in here gets still. Inner silence is not the absence of thought. It's the space between thoughts where clarity breathes. It's not about muting the world, it's about rising above it, letting the noise pass through without grabbing hold of your mind. In a time where everybody's talking, reacting, performing, and chasing validation, the one who can remain inwardly silent holds a kind of power that's rare and unshakable. Silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. It's strength, it's a weapon. You see, chaos feeds on your reaction. Every time you engage with it, emotionally, mentally, verbally, you give it more fuel, you become part of the storm. But when you cultivate inner silence, something remarkable happens. The storm no longer has anything to grab onto. You stop being pulled into every argument, every drama, every digital fire. You begin to move differently, calmly, decisively, unmoved by the chaos, because you've mastered the one place where the world can't reach unless you invite it, your own inner space. Most people think they need to fix the world to feel better, but what they really need is to stop letting the world hijack their peace. Silence is your boundary. It says, not everything gets access to my energy. And the deeper your silence, the stronger your boundary. You stop reacting to everything. You begin to choose your responses, and that difference between reaction and response is the difference between a chaotic life and a powerful one. Inner silence is not found by accident. It's cultivated, it's chosen, it's earned. It begins when you stop running from yourself, because noise isn't just outside, it's also inside. And for many, the scariest place to sit is alone with their own thoughts. That's why people distract themselves so much. They'll scroll, talk, eat, watch, post, anything to avoid facing what's really going on in their mind. But when you finally sit in the quiet, uncomfortable as it may be at first, you start to hear things that matter. Not the opinions, not the fears, but the truth. And the truth is always simple. It always comes without noise. It arrives in silence. You won't find your center scrolling endlessly. You won't find it arguing with strangers online. You won't find it obsessing over things you can't control. You'll find it when you turn inward, when you create enough quiet to hear the still voice that's always been waiting for you beneath the noise. That voice doesn't shout, it doesn't beg, it whispers, and if you're not silent, you'll miss it. People often mistake silence for passivity, but there's nothing passive about stillness. It's the most active kind of strength. It requires discipline to not speak when you're provoked. It requires wisdom to not act out of impulse. It takes courage to stand still when the world is racing. But the reward is clarity, and clarity is power. When you begin to operate from a place of inner silence, you're no longer manipulated by urgency. You don't get pulled into every crisis because you can feel what's real and what's noise. You know what deserves your energy and what doesn't. You know who to listen to and who to ignore, and most importantly, you know how to listen to yourself. In silence, you remember what matters. You begin to see the patterns. You recognize which parts of the chaos are mirrors of your own unhealed places. And you heal not by fighting the chaos, but by refusing to feed it. You stop trying to fix everyone and everything around you and begin mastering the only thing you truly can yourself. And when you've built that silence into your life, you become dangerous in the best way. Because the world can no longer predict you, provoke you, or control you. You move from intention, not reaction, from alignment, not pressure. You don't need to explain, prove, or defend. You just are. And that right there is power, quiet, unbreakable, real. Strength today is often confused with performance. The louder someone is, the stronger we think they must be. The more they post, the more powerful they appear. But real strength isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It moves in silence and leaves a trail of change, not noise. True strength doesn't need applause, because it already knows what it is. It doesn't look outward for validation. It doesn't need to be seen to feel real. It lives in the quiet certainty of someone who has done the inner work and no longer needs the world's approval to stand tall. So many people are living for the reaction. They do things just to be seen doing them. They suffer just to be noticed. Even their healing becomes performative, posted, packaged, and presented for likes. But what happens when no one claps, when no one says, "Well done"? Does their strength vanish? That's the test. If your power depends on applause, it was never really yours to begin with. Real strength is invisible at first. It shows up in private moments, when you choose restraint over retaliation, when you forgive without needing recognition, when you walk away from what no longer serves you and don't tell the world why. That kind of power doesn't need to be broadcast. It just is. And when it's real, you can feel it. Not in the volume of someone's voice, but in the depth of their presence. We've been taught to associate strength with dominance, power over others. But true strength is power over self. It's the quiet discipline to keep going when no one is watching, the resolve to grow in silence, the courage to be misunderstood, to let people talk, and to keep building anyway. The humility to not need credit even when you deserve it. The strongest people are often the most underestimated because their strength doesn't show up in ways that society rewards. They don't flex. They don't beg to be heard. They simply live in alignment with their values. They walk with integrity. They don't react to everything. And in a world that's constantly demanding attention, choosing silence is the boldest act of all. Think about it. What would your life look like if you stopped doing things for recognition? If you stopped explaining yourself, justifying yourself, performing your growth for others to validate? What if your journey was just yours, sacred and silent? That's not weakness. That's power. That's maturity. That's ownership. People often assume that staying silent is surrender. But sometimes silence is strategy. When you're secure in who you are, you don't need to prove it. You just live it, and people feel it. Not because you're shouting it from the rooftops, but because the way you move, the way you carry yourself, speaks louder than any words ever could. This is the essence of power, when you no longer crave attention, but attract respect through presence. when your actions are rooted in truth, not in performance, when your discipline, your peace, your consistency becomes unshakable because it's not tied to anything outside of you. You don't have to announce every decision you make. You don't have to broadcast every change in your life. You can transform in silence. You can grow in shadows, and that kind of growth, the private kind, is the most powerful because it's not being shaped by what others think. It's being shaped by what's true for you, and here's the secret. When you stop needing applause, you get free. Free to fail, free to learn, free to rise again without shame, free to take risks no one understands. Free to walk paths others don't approve of. You become dangerous, not because you seek power, but because you no longer need permission. You've built something solid inside yourself, and that foundation isn't shaken when the world goes silent. So let the world be loud, let it chase noise, let others perform. You stay grounded, stay silent, stay real. Don't measure your worth by who claps. Measure it by how deeply you've learned to stand in your truth, especially when no one's looking. Because, in the end, strength that needs a stage is just performance. But strength that grows in silence, that's legacy.